Hey guys, and welcome back to the mudstudsskullcaps podcast. I'm Robin.
And I'm Kelsey, and in today's episode, we're going to break down some common phrases our trainers and instructors have spent a lot of time yelling at us from across the arena. We want to help you better understand what your trainer wants and what is likely the root cause of the problem.
All right, welcome back.
Remember, guys, if you like what you hear, don't forget to leave a review or subscribe. You can follow us on iTunes Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
And now we can get into the many of things we have had trainers and various instructors shout at us across the arena that we ourselves completely misinterpreted and did mildly wrong.
I mean, I think part of the problem is some of these phrases are just like super common, but could mean 500 different things. And it's trying to like figure out exactly what your instructor means, why do they mean it, and like what is oftentimes what your instructor's yelling at you is like trying to address the symptom, not the problem. And so I wanted today to kind of break down what some of the problems are and why these symptoms are showing and why your instructor keeps saying the same thing over and over and over and no progress seems to be. And we don't seem to be getting any better at whatever it is our instructor wants us to fix.
Okay. What's your first one?
So the first one, I think this is probably one of the most commonly used phrases, especially in any jumping lesson or anytime you go through a grid, is leg, right? More leg. There's never seems to be enough leg no matter what you're doing. You're not using enough of your leg somehow. Really, this is like a condensed version or an abbreviated version of saying get him in front of your leg or keep him in front of your leg, right? The idea is that you're creating and maintaining energy. So typically leg is used as a term to get the rider and the horse to get more energy to engage that hindquarters. And it's not used to create speed, right? There's a difference between energy and speed. And I think a lot of times, especially for when we're going around a jump course, we turn that idea of more leg into more speed instead of really getting that quality canter that we need.
No, I agree. That actually goes off of my first one, which was more forward or like come to the jump. And I think that's where we get confused and we hear more forward. And we're like, great, got it. I have a gas pedal. Putting it to the floor now. But that's not at all what it's asking. They're asking for you to like have more energy, get that bouncier canter and that desire of your horse to move forward and to come to the jump or come through the grid.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I'm a very visual person. I love when someone can describe like a scene to me or what it should feel like. So when I think of get him in front of your leg or more leg, I'm thinking again of my big circle of energy that starts either in the haunches or with my leg asking, goes over the back, through my seat, through the neck, through the horse's mouth, back through the core, and right, it's this big circle of energy. When your horse is in front of your leg, that means there's more energy in front of you than there is behind you. And so you want to think of that circle being either equally proportioned or bigger, more of it in front of you.
Right, and I think that also can kind of go with some of the mistakes that we make as riders when we hear these things of more leg, more forward, is that sometimes when we hear this, I know I had a really bad habit of it, is all of a sudden I would drop down into my seat and start driving with my seat. And instead of allowing that energy and the forward momentum to keep coming forward, I'd have this like jackhammer seat that would break the circle, that would stop the energy there. More leg doesn't mean all of a sudden you're kicking on the barrel of your horse. You're just encouraging them to come forward. So you might need to give a little kick, but it's not like a full-on flapping of the legs like you're trying to take off on a runway.
Right. And it's, the horse not responding, there may be a multitude of reasons why, for me, if you are asking and your horse doesn't respond, is it because you nag and he's tuned you out? Or is he not responding because he doesn't have the strength to respond? He doesn't have the strength to maintain that more forward gait. In my opinion, like lazy horses a lazy horse is something you can work through. Lazy is not a permanent state of being. That with sort of some conscious effort and some conscious training efforts on your behalf, you can make a lazy horse a forward horse. They're never going to be a hot horse, but you can easily turn a horse who maybe ignores your leg into a horse that responds easily to that leg.
We had a lazy horse growing up, Dublin, as he would kind of be, it wasn't that he was lazy, it was that we overused our leg on him and that he just tuned us out. He just started ignoring us. And so I think when an instructor says more leg, add leg, is maybe you are adding leg, but you just have to change up how you're doing it. Maybe you do have a crop and you need to reach back and give him a nice smack on the butt just to like all of a sudden tell him like, hey, now we're going. It's not just applying the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. You have to kind of change and tweak. Maybe you're applying it one way, change how you're doing it so you can get a different horse out of it so you get more energy.
Yeah, and you should never like ask the same way twice. So if he doesn't listen the first time to a little bit of leg, then don't use a little bit of leg again. Increase, right? We always, in my instructor would always do like the 1, 2, 3 method. Once nicely, second time with a little bit of tone, and third time you're yelling and demanding it. And then, right, you go back to level 1, and then you increase until your horse gets the idea of what you're asking for and to move off. One of my favorite exercises to actually do for a lazy horse, and we did this with Dublin all the time when I had students riding him as well as when I was riding him, is we would at the canter, because the canter was where he was actually like sometimes the laziest, was we would do like a 3, 2, 1 go, which meant like we'd ask a little bit, we'd balance him, and then we'd just yell at him like, you have to canter forward, maintain 3 big canter strides, and then you can peter back out. We're going to recollect, and we're going to try again, or reconnect and get gathered back up. And so it's this idea of when I say go, you need to jet and leave my leg and not just be tuning me out. And then as a rider, you have to allow them to have that big stride and that big response. Even if it's, more than you want or less than you want, you have to reward them for the effort.
Yeah, that's actually one of the exercises I had written down to work on more forward is working on adjusting your stride, being able to push forward for maybe half a circle to get more energy. And that's not more speed. It's that you're changing their stride, getting them to either lengthen it or starting to bring it back. And now when you bring it back, you're not taking away that energy that you just worked your butt off to get. You're shortening that stride and making it a bouncier, energetic canter. And so a good way for that is like if you set canter poles out, if you set canter poles to a slightly different stride than what your horse is, you can maybe set them a little bit long or a little bit short, in which you can work on making them more adjustable, which gives you more of that energy. And another really good one, which you also mentioned, is transitions. You have the 1, 2, 3, go. You have 3 strides from when you ask, for either walk to trot, trot to canter, transition, that they listen and they move off your leg and into that. And if they're really slow and sluggish, you work on making those transitions super prompt and just immediate.
And we do the same thing with like a trot to walk transition where like the goal is maybe not a pretty transition. The goal is as soon as I put my leg on, you are out in a big trot. And that, we start at a walk and we just ask at that level 3 right away so that he powers off, and then we start to back it off each consecutive transitions a little less, but maintaining that same push and that same thrust. And then once we have that good transition, that good gait quality, then we can start to, all right, now we want a little bit of stretch. Now we want a little bit of softness in that transition. But for Dublin, like if we didn't start with a good gait quality and a good gait, we were never going to get anything else. So we always had to start on a longer rein. We couldn't start packaged up. We had to start on a longer rein and just start with like forward. We have to get forward. So part of this idea is also the phrase free forward movement. Free forward movement, to me, like there's 2 meanings to it. One is that when you ask your horse to go, he willingly goes and like he's light off your legs and is responsive. But it also means that you as the rider are allowing for that movement to move through the horse so that you are really conscious about how that energy moves through his body and how your body, your seat, your hands affects its ability to move through the horse, and that your seat is soft, your hips are open, your hands are soft and giving so that energy can move through and that you're not creating a block. So when you have an instructor who is continuously telling you leg, 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 this is a good opportunity for a student to say, okay, what exactly do you mean? I don't think students oftentimes ask enough questions, and I know I was really bad at this. Like, I would always want to, I'd want them to think I got it, even if I didn't get it. I was like, no, I'm smart. I understand what's going on. But I think this is a really good one where you can say like, what is it that you're looking for? When you say leg on, what is the response? Do you just want him to be faster? Is it just that he's too slow? Is it that you need a better, canter? His canter isn't bouncy enough to come through that grid. And really ask, what are you looking for?
Yeah, no, that's a really good idea. And especially just lets your instructor, trainer, clinician know that you're keyed in and listening, and that you're honestly trying to work through it and figure it out. You're not just sitting up there in la la land, that you're trying to think through it and trying to figure it out.
And this is also how, as a student, you learn feel. Feel is what, the instructor can see it and you have to feel it. So if you can ask them, what is it you're looking for? What is it I'm missing? Because oftentimes, especially with beginner students, or they're in that like intermediate phase of riding, they don't often feel the horse sucking back. They don't often realize that the horse is giving them a bunch of cues that they're like about to walk. And so this is a great opportunity as an instructor, as a rider, as a student, to try to figure out what's the feeling we're missing? Do you not feel him sucking back? Do you not feel that change? And really have a conversation about, what is the instructor seeing? How is the rider feeling it? And what is that goal response? What if I use my leg, how should my horse respond?
I definitely never asked enough questions in any of my lessons. I don't think I ever.
And that's like the hard thing, right? Is because an instructor is trying to communicate what they're seeing, and you get the feel. You're not seeing what they're seeing, and they're not feeling what you're feeling. And that communication, like, how do you have that communication? Because those are, two totally different sensations. And it's a hard place to try to bridge that gap, especially if you, like, as the student, have no idea what's going on. And oftentimes, like, instructors, we often don't ride our students' horses. We don't know exactly what they're feeling. We have a general idea of what they're feeling because we've ridden enough horses. But I think every horse has a unique way of, like, okay, so you can feel the change in some horses' back when they're about to slow down. And other horses, you can feel it in your hands as they're starting to slow down. So it's just a hard thing to kind of explain that feel.
Exactly. And I can remember countless times after a lesson or a clinic or something, getting back in the truck afterwards, and I remember saying, like, I know what they were asking, but my horse wasn't responding the way they were thinking. Like, it wasn't the issue they were trying to digest. It wasn't what I was feeling. Like, that wasn't what was happening that maybe the instructor was seeing, but they didn't understand what you, the rider, are feeling. And so, like, don't discount what you're feeling. It's very important.
Yeah, and explain that. Like, when my horse goes to slow down, I feel heavy in the hands, not stiff in the back. Like, my seat feels still soft. And try to communicate that with your instructor so that they can tweak what that goal is or what you should be doing. Okay. Ready for the second one? Or you have more to add forward?
No, we can move on to the second one. I think we covered everything that I want to talk about with more forward. So my next one was straight line bit to elbow.
Good.
Which I have heard that one numerous times. And I think where I used to get it confused is I wouldn't always necessarily be bracing down, which I think is what we commonly think of with straight line bit to elbow, is I would be breaking my wrist inwards, especially my left wrist. I don't know what it does out there, but straightness is not my go-to with that one. I don't know what happens. And so I think a good thing to remember with straight line bit to elbow is they're not always addressing maybe you're bracing down, but sometimes they're addressing, like, are you breaking your wrist somewhere? Are you crossing over the withers with your reins? And it's always a really good one just to think back to, am I, interfering with my horse by either keeping my hands too high, because this is now a method that people are being taught to correct their horses from overbending. Am I bracing down? Am I breaking in my wrist? And so a good exercise that I found with this one is like sticking a stick either on the inside of your glove or on the outside of your glove, if depending on like which way you're breaking your wrist. And so that will kind of poke you or let you know when you're starting to break your wrist either direction.
Yeah, I always tell my students to ride around like you're one of those rock'em sock'em robots, right? How their hands come like straight forward. They don't bend in. They don't bend like out, down. If you want to hit your opponent, you've got to go straight from the hip. So I always say, like, ride like a robot. Put your hands, punch with your hands in front of you as you ride. But that's a really good point, is that straight line bit to elbow isn't just the line, that line from the side. It's also that line from above, that you can break that on multiple planes and really affect the way that horse is feeling the bit. So yeah, that's a great point, that you're going to be you can be bracing multiple different ways and locking your wrists. That was, I definitely had that feeling for a while.
I still have this feeling. I'm still reminding myself, like, gotta fix that wrist. Honey, it's not supposed to do that.
And it's so interesting. There's a lot of things with riding when as soon as you get it in the right position, I'm like, oh, I've never felt that before. My arm has never been there before. And I remember that really distinctly when I finally figured out where straight was with my wrists. Because it's like once you get them straight from the top, then there's this like my hand's too high, my hand's too low. Like I bend a lot of times. When we ride with dressage whips, your dressage whip ends up across your hip. That means your wrist is broken at the bottom and that you're pushing your hands down and forward. Your dressage whip should be across like the lower part of your thigh if you have a straight arm. So that's one way to check is where's my dressage whip being carried? Is it across my hip or is it across my thigh? And that has a direct impact on how your hands are being held.
I am so guilty of that one. I don't know why, but I always prefer to carry it like up towards my hip joint. And then as soon as I find myself doing that, I'm like, gosh, dang it. Now I got to adjust again. And I was just sending mixed signals this entire time.
Yeah, so that's a really good one. If you have 2 dressage whips, one in each hand, and try to carry them lower down across your thigh and see what is that feeling. Riding with a dressage whip sucks because you can never get your hand quite right with a tool in it. But for a lot of us, our horses don't ride in spurs or don't appreciate spurs. So we're left with trying to use a dressage whip. So you want to make sure that, you're being equal on both hands and that hand holding the dressage whip isn't twisting more than the inside hand, right? Or the inside hand isn't twisting more than the outside hand.
Right. So
yeah, my phrase that goes along with this is to stop bracing. I was really bad with my shoulders. I blame this on having longer arms and starting on a pony, and then I switched to a bigger horse, but the habit was already there, where I would brace through my shoulders. I would kind of get these chicken wings out to the side, and my hands would end up like kind of in my lap and broken. So I'd have this like weird angle all over the place. And so my instructor would always, stop bracing, soften your hands. And this kind of comes from 2 different places. The first place this comes from is not having the right muscles strong enough. So for me, my shoulders would kind of lock open so my elbows could be open, but this allowed my core to stay turned off. My core wasn't strong enough to support my hands in front of me, right? Your hands should be your arms fall softly at your side. Your core is pushing your hands forward and holding them for you. So because my core was weak, my body just said, okay, well, we're just, brace out and hold it stiff this way. And the other part of that is it is a work management tool, meaning that because my core was weak and I could not default to a soft, relaxed position, my brain said, you are being challenged. Turn off the feel, turn off that part of your body and just be tense. And that was one way. So I didn't have to worry about my arms. I couldn't feel my arms, and not like my arms weren't numb, but I wasn't aware of what they were doing because I was focused on other things. And because my default wasn't to be relaxed, it wasn't for my core to hold me in that moment, I just had to lock out my arms and focus on other things, which was often, keeping my horse forward, keeping my seat soft, all these other pieces of trying to keep my horse together and doing the movement. Your brain just turns off part of your body, the part that's weak and can't keep up.
Where do you find that you brace the most often? Like, is there a certain, because I know for me, I know that I brace on the backside of landing a fence because Trin likes to jet off a little bit. And so my immediate reaction is I'm like, oh, I'm going to hold my horse back by the bit. And it's incorrect all over the place. But like, that's where I find I brace the most and have to work on it. But where do you brace the most?
I think I brace the most when I'm asking for my horse to be soft. So instead of staying soft and requesting that, like, here's a little wiggle or a little play on the bit, please stretch, I often just hold and lock my arm to ask for that instead of staying soft. So that's like where my biggest issue is I'm like, come on, horse, like, let's relax and stretch. And that's usually where I find myself really, bracing and pulling them down instead of like, okay, we need to bend, we need to, go, we need to stay a lot softer, we need to use my inside leg. That's often where I find myself bracing is the like, come on, just stretch. And this goes back to, humans are a very hand-dominant species, and our hands want to do all of the work, and our legs are like, yeah, we'll catch up. We'll do it later. And that's something you've got to mentally start to change. So the image Sally Swift uses that I think fits really well with this bracing idea is that she talks about riding with your skeleton, so that you should focus first on where your bones are being placed, and then that will leave the muscles to do less work. Instead of trying to pull your body into the correct place with the muscles, try to place your bones correctly, make sure sort of that base layer is correct, it's even, your bones are stacked correctly, and then your muscles have less work to do to try to balance you out if you're already starting from a more balanced position.
I like the concept of stacking.
Yes, I love the block idea. That's one of her other big things, right? Is that you have your body is made of a bunch of different blocks, like, you know, the ones you played with as a little kid, and that you constantly have to keep your blocks stacked on top of each other. So I love that image she has of the blocks as a rider being blocks, and I use that all the time with my kids.
Right, yeah, and that one works really well for myself as a rider, because, I mean, we've all heard different sayings that just don't work for you. It doesn't make sense, but the stacking idea makes a lot of sense. It clicks.
Yeah, and I like the idea of the muscles because I think a lot of time, or using your skeleton instead of your muscles to move you around, because I think a lot of times, you know, if we're unbalanced in our seat, we tend to just like put more weight over the other direction instead of like moving our seat to be straight in the saddle. We'll kind of just like tilt with weight, and that's not helping. Like, you need to move so you are starting from a place of balance, and then you can kind of stack your muscles on top, stack your blocks on top, and you'll have a better position and a better place to be riding from.
Right, and the idea of stacking and working with your skeleton, because now I'm thinking about it, is it makes you actually make the correction correctly rather than contorting your body in some weird way by maneuvering your muscles.
Yes. Yeah. Back to fixing the problem versus fixing the symptom. My exercise for this, and it's just like, it's not an exercise, it's a reminder, is that when you start finding yourself in a movement or an exercise that's too challenging, that's when you're going to start to find yourself bracing. Go back to the next easiest thing. So say you're doing 15-meter or 10-meter canter circles, and you're really struggling to stay soft, keep your hips soft, keep everything together. Go back to either trot or to a bigger canter circle, regather. Make sure everything's soft, everything's in the correct position, you're riding softly, you're not bracing, you're sitting nice and tall, your skeleton's in the correct place. Then go back to the challenging exercise for 3 seconds and get out. It's the same thing as doing reps at the gym. I think oftentimes as riders, we want to like be gritty and we want to get the job done and whatever it takes, determination. And that's just like riding from pure tension. So you have to remember that this is a muscle building exercise as well. If you struggle to do a certain activity and to stay soft and stay relaxed, just a little bit at a time and you'll get there. Don't try to conquer the whole thing at once.
Of course. I mean, it makes sense, because how many times do we say half of our rides are strength training for our horses, and that you can't expect your horse to be doing these difficult movements constantly and every single time you get on and ride. I think that needs to be applied to us as the riders as well.
Yes. Yeah, I think we definitely forget that, and this is something that has bugged me for a while, as we treat our horses and our bodies very differently. And the truth of the matter is, we need to stop doing that. We need to recognize that we have to train ourselves just as much as we train our horses, and take care of ourselves just as much as we take care of our horses.
Next thing we hear getting yelled across the arena, what's yours?
Is wait! Wait for it. Don't move your upper body. Just stay still. This is usually screamed at the base of a jump. When a rider tends to want to overfold or fold prior to the jump coming up. And I found myself, especially this one's, I think, really common when riders are learning to jump, because we all see the picture of a top rider going over a really big fence, and they're in this huge they've got a big forward fold and they're down on the horse's neck, and we think, oh, that's where I need to be, over this crossrail. And it's not. Like, you don't need to be anywhere near the horse's neck for that crossrail. You can stay real nice and tall. So one of the exercises I always tell my kids, or thoughts, is to think about your head staying on the same plane. That your head does not get to move while you're jumping. It gets no lower, it gets no higher. It stays on the same plane. And Sally Swift has an image of like a skier in the book, as a skier goes down the hills and up hills, that their head stays the same height, but their body, adjusts as they go up and down those hills, and they're still able to stay balanced. So this is a big one for waiting.
I would my next two, or not next two, my next one is it's either sit up or chest up, which goes along with weight, and which I think they're trying to achieve the same thing or something of similar nature, in which they're asking you to lift your chest up, not anticipate that jump, roll your shoulders back, and keep your back soft while straight. And a lot of times, I know I particularly used to mishear this term, and chest up, I would all of a sudden just go ramrod straight, as though someone had like stuck a 2x4 down my back. And that's not what your instructor is looking for. That's not what your trainer wants. It helped me to imagine that rather than like having a 2x4 down my back, that at the top of my helmet, a string was coming out and just pulling me upright. And that kind of goes along with the idea of stacking your spine as though it's blocks. So you're keeping yourself soft rather than, stiff as a board, but you're now sitting up straight and your chest is open. So chest up is also, they're asking you to open your chest. Your shoulders could have been closed down, and they want you to open your chest, relax back your shoulders, relax your spine while keeping it soft and straight, not with like a hard curve in it or overbent. Not throw your body at the jump.
Yeah, so this is something that us taller riders really also struggle with, is trying to absorb the motion and the energy as you go through the jump. This is something that my first half of the jump would always look great, and then the second half I would get this wave through my body. Part of this was because my core was never strong enough. My legs were great at this point in my riding. I had spent so much time strengthening my lower leg, but I was getting this like huge wave in my body as I went through the jumps or through the courses. And this was in part because I wasn't getting my hands out either. Like I was trying to stay too stacked up and my release wasn't fluid enough. And so it's not just, the fixed instructor would always say was right chest up, get your chest up and back to get rid of this energy. And that didn't work because it wasn't just chest up it's not just that flexion you were talking about. It's staying sort of more back over the back of the saddle and being able to kind of stretch your arms and your body more than like just flexing your chest.
Right. And it's also, they're not asking you to like start riding behind the motion. They're not asking you to all of a sudden not be moving with your horse and riding with your horse. And I used to interpret this where I would all of a sudden just yank my chest up and I would be riding behind my horse's motion, almost just riding backwards to the jump or in the canter. It was terrible. It did not work out well for anybody, but they're not asking you to ride backwards. They're just asking you to sit up a little bit and allow the horse to come forward, because when you're leaning forward or your chest is collapsed, you're putting weight more on the horse's forehand and they can't pick their shoulders up. They can't lift themselves up because they have your weight to contend with.
Yeah, and I think, the mistake I would make often with the weight is when people said, wait, I would sit back down. And I would think that was waiting, and really that was like dropping my horse's back out. Now he's approaching the fence hollow. Now he's going to have to make a bigger effort to get his legs and back up over the fence, and I was making the issue worse. So I always, ride in a half seat. It's somewhere between 2-point and sitting down, and that way if you need to sit down and drive real quick, or you are ready to go because you're already light in the saddle. So finding that half seat position is really, really important. And if you're really struggling with this, it's often due to the jumps being too big for you. And you haven't been able to develop that really good habit yet of being able to be still over that fence.
Right, because it's that anticipation that's just killing you, because you just know like the jump is coming. I have to throw my body over it so we get both of us over it. And I think part of this also comes from too long of stirrups. I see so many people, you tall kids included, with way too long of stirrups. And it's so hard to get your butt out of the saddle, because rather than being in 2-point, almost the entire time you're in that half seat because your stirrups are too long. And so when it comes to the jump, you just throw your whole body over it to get your butt out of the saddle, to get your chest over the jump, rather than shorten your stirrups a hole or two. And now you can get yourself up out of the saddle. When you're coming to the jump, you can drop yourself down a little bit so you're in that half seat. And if you need to, you can drive with your seat.
Yeah, this is something I always go through this phase where when I'm building up my leg strength, there's this phase I go through where my stirrups become like jockey length, and everyone always laughs at me, but it's like this mental progression I work through. I don't know why I end up here, but I always end up at a phase where I'm riding with like the shortest stirrups in the world for a couple weeks, because it's like it's building that 2-point building that range of motion. So an exercise I love to do to build my legs for this exercise in particular is to practice going from a standing position all the way down to your chest touching the horse's neck so that you're focusing on getting those hips to be really soft while keeping that position correct. That's a great strength training exercise for your legs, for getting your body to get that habit of moving my hips, because if you're trying to get your chest down to the neck, you have to move your hips backwards. You can't just lie over. You want that chest to be closer to that withers. And that's sort of the position you're going to be going through while you're jumping. Your horse is just closing those angles, not you.
Right. And it also comes from, along with the like strengthening your lower leg, it comes from feeling unstable when you have your stirrups shorter. And so riders feel more comfortable when the stirrups are a little bit longer and they can still wrap their leg around the horse's barrel. But that doesn't help them with getting over the jump in their chest and getting their butt out of the saddle.
I remember having a lesson with, I don't know, do I name drop here? Or I had a lesson with an Olympian. And the one lesson that really stuck with me was you only sit to the jump in an emergency. That is your backup plan. If your horse is not going forward and your butt is already in the saddle, you're out of luck. You have no more weapons. You have no more way to increase that horse's go, to increase that thrust, and you are out of luck. So if I sit down, my horse knows that they need to go. Otherwise, that's right, you got to ride in that half seat position and stay really light.
Dang, that was something I really needed to hear today, because I am always riding to the jump with my butt seated in the saddle because I just feel more comfortable, more stable, and I don't feel stable in my 2-point, my half seat.
And I know we all feel more stable with our butts in the saddle, but I have it on very good authority from a top rider herself that you can't do that. that is your backup plan when things start to go wrong.
No, that makes so much sense. Now I'm like, I gotta go do cavaletti work and see if I can.
Exactly.
Yeah, I need to go see if I can ride to an 18-inch jump in my half seat.
Yes. And so that's why, you may be comfortable doing 3-foot or, those bigger fences. But if you don't have that habit developed yet, go back to small fences, go back to small grids so that it's an automatic response to get in that half seat, to stay in that half seat, to wait with your body, let the horse do the work. As it becomes, if you can do it 100% of the time, you can put your jump up 3 inches. If you can only do it 60% of the time, you don't get to move your jump up.
Because we were looking at a rider the other day, and while her position was a little funky, we watched her every single jump she would ride into. She was in that half seat, and it just allowed her to just, when the horse went up for the jump, she was already able to fold her body so easily. It wasn't this huge movement of throwing her chest over the jump that you see a lot of us out there doing when we're riding up to the jump with our butt in the saddle.
Exactly. And that's like, it feeds into the problem. The longer you keep your bottom in the saddle, the bigger you feel that fold has to be. So if you can get in that half seat, you're halfway there. You don't have to make much of a motion at all. And in fact, your hips are already flexed and ready for your horse to close them. The reason when your bottom's in the saddle, you have to make that big motion is because your hips can't flex if they're sitting down.
Right. And it's funny because how often are we sitting on our horses asking for transitions and we want it done with the smallest movement? We want them to listen to these like hair of a change in our seat for a downward transition. We want them just to feel us exhaling, and now they relax their bodies. And yet when we approach a jump, we want to make this massive movement to show that, look, I'm really jumping. Look at me fold. It's so great. Yeah.
The bigger the fold if it's all created by you, it doesn't matter. It's not worth anything. A huge fold over a little fence is only making your horse's life harder and more confusing because you're throwing your weight up on their forehand, and now they have to compensate for you and for themselves. So when your instructor says wait, get in that half seat position, get nice and quiet, and wait. Do not move. Your horse has this.
Exactly. That's when it comes into play. I know so many people probably going to be, because I used to come back with this comment all the time, is that, well, my horse has a weird jump. They have a huge bascule. I have to fold for their bascule. And once again, it's not you making the movement. It's you allowing the horse to close your hip angle for you. So maybe you are folding a little bit more than normal people are over, let's say, a cross rail because your horse over jumps it or they're really basculing over it. And that's just you allowing them to close your angles, not you closing it for them.
Exactly. And yeah, if your horse has a big jump, they take off early. We always, the big goal is to get your horse right to the base of the fence and then to jump. This isn't, as you said earlier, it's not a riding backwards to get your horse to the base of a jump. It is allowing that forward motion. And often, part of the wanting to overfold is the rider's eye hasn't developed the way it should to be able to count and know when the actual stride is going to happen. So if you're having a hard time predicting when your horse is going to take off, you're more likely to make this bigger movement because it could be any time, right? But on truth, if you just stay still and you're ready, it doesn't matter when it happens, early or late, you're going to be there.
See, that actually kind of goes in. I wasn't sure if I was going to mention this at last saying, but I think I'm going to do it. And that is, it's eyes up.
Mm-hmm.
Because eyes up they're not really, they are telling you to get your eyes up, but it's also them telling you to stop anticipating. Stop picking at your horse to the base of the jump. Stop anticipating with your chest, with your body. Stop anticipating. And a lot of times, at least when I was younger, I used to use it eyes up. I'd be like, okay, fine, I'll just look at the tops of the trees. I would over exaggerate the movement, but in reality, it actually did help a little bit because it got my eyes off of the jump where I had been fixated on. And so, of course, when your eyes are fixated on the jump, you stare at it as it comes closer and closer. And suddenly you're over the top of the jump and you're still looking at it. And you're like, oh, look at that. We made it. That's incredible. So it's just to get you to stop anticipating, stop fixating on that jump, on that stride that you see, and allow your horse to do part of their job.
This is one I use all the time. So I actually do a lot of guided trail rides. I had a job where I worked in Eastern Washington, and I took riders out on trail rides all the time. And this was something I would say to the little kids all the time, was we'd be riding down a hill and they would start to panic because they were watching the hill. They could see the footing, everything. They were fixating just like a rider does on that jump. They were fixating on the ground, and then they wanted to start interfering with their horse and making their horse do things so that they wouldn't feel the horse going down the hill or the horse wouldn't fall, right? Like they're looking at the wrong thing and getting anxious and nervous and trying to control their horse and interfering with the horse. So my exercise was always like, count the trees. How many trees are on that hill? How many chickens do you see in the yard? How many of this? So I'd always get the kids, it would get them to focus on something else, but it would get their position correct as well. I would get those eyes up, looking where they need to go, and to stop fixating on the thing in front of them. And it's the same concept with jumping, is that if you can look up, you can look past the jump. Be riding past the jump, ride to the next one. You cannot fixate on that one in front of you, that one that's, the next one. You have to be ready and keep going.
Right. And so exercise that I absolutely love to work on this, you can start off with just ground pulls, and you can move on to cavaletti or smaller jumps. It's not really one that you have to put the jumps way up high for or anything. It's work on them smaller. And this is where you have 20 meter to 30 meter circle that you're on, and you place a pole at each of like the 4 points on a circle. You have north, west, south, east. Place one pole at each spot and then work on it at walk, trot, and canter, where you're coming around your circle. And when you approach the pole that you're going over, have your eyes on the next one across the arena that you're going to next. So don't be looking at the one that you're coming to. Place your eyes on the one that's next. That way you're not picking the stride to the pole. And it's great when it's smaller and you're just working with cavaletti or poles on the ground, because you don't feel the absolute need to correct your horse and take your horse to the base of the jump. Whereas if the jumps are bigger, you might feel that need and you're just not comfortable there yet. So bring it all the way back down. That way you can let the horse take care of itself, and you can develop this better habit of not picking to the base of the jump and looking beyond what you're going to.
Yes. Yeah, always look at least a quarter of your circle ahead, right? And that quarter point's going to constantly be moving, but always a quarter ahead. None of this like 50% ahead. That's always one of my favorites is I'm looking ahead. I'm looking where I'm going. It's like, you're actually not going that direction. We're over here. We're over here.
All right. Are you ready to close out?
I think we are. Yeah, guys, that is our episode for the day. I hope you enjoyed getting a little bit of a breakdown of some of these exercises and some of these common phrases your trainer is constantly yelling at you to fix. And maybe this will help you understand a little bit better of what you need to be fixing and why it's a problem. But if you like what you heard, don't forget to go to iTunes, leave a review, or any podcast app that has a review. Those reviews are for other people so they can help, they can find this podcast. They can know it's a good one to listen to. Hit that subscribe button on the Apple iTunes podcast app.
And then if you guys have any questions, topics, just something off the tip of your mind that you want to let us know about, you can always reach out to us on Instagram at mudstudsskullcaps, or you can send us emails at mudstudsskullcaps@gmail.com. Thank you guys so much for listening to us, and remember to stay safe, stay classy, and stay in the saddle. Bye.
Bye.